And so that led to an incredible amount of fatalities. An incredible amount of fatalities. So in 1966, there was a publication that was published by the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration and the Institute of Medicine that was called Accidental Death and Disabilities. And this was a landmark publication because of the fact it was a direct response to traffic fatalities. No, it was not a direct response to cardiac arrest. It was not a response to MI or stroke. The founding of modern EMS in the United States was a direct result of the carnage that was going on the American road system. So when we look at this publication, this then led to the first publication of an EMT manual and the first training of an EMT of the EMTs in the U.S. This is significant because of the fact that in this publication that was published by the American Academy of Surgeons, of orthopedic surgeons. Again, the EMT training that was begun in 1968 to 1972 was by orthopedic surgeons. Cardiac arrest, MI, stroke, medical emergencies were secondary. The modern EMS and the first training manuals, the first instruction manuals was for orthopedic surgeons. And not only that, but they looked at equipment and communications. The next major change happened in 1973 with federal funding for trauma projects and identified EMS system components, specifically 15 different EMS components by Public Law 9374. And it's this foundation that brings us up to the present and where we are today in the United States with motor vehicle accidents. This is the current state. This graph shows the traveler type in the most recent crashes. The driver is the most injured, passengers are second. We have a significant problem with pedestrians and motorcyclists, and so we can take a look at this whole spectrum of who is being injured in motor vehicle accidents across the United States. The emergency center, when people are calling 911, they're specifically asking for an EMS response a vast majority of the time. Police and fire are secondary. So currently in the U.S., 911 in a motor vehicle accident means calling for an ambulance or for EMS. And this shows where what was happening with the injured. Most of the injuries are significant, some are severe, but still in the United States, a percentage that takes over a year to be able to recover from their disabilities. And how they were transported from the crash site. Many people are not transported from the crash site because when we talk about these injuries, some are acute, but ambulance by far and away is the major transporter, it's not helicopter. And then finally, where were they treated by traffic injuries? Clearly, the hospital is the predominant choice. So when we look at these motor vehicle accidents and saving lives, it's a system of care that's been developed, and that's where we are in the United States, a system of care. It all begins in dispatch. Patient care begins when the telephone rings and we're doing call triage in a different system. Because what we're trying to do is determine the right response and the right resource with the appropriate response to that scene of that motor vehicle accident. This is done by, I'm also in the medical director's workshop and been giving talks in there, so I'm a bit hoarse. But it all begins by asking the right questions. And these right questions are, tell me exactly what happened, and right under that is, are you with the patient now? How many patients are injured, and is there entrapment? So we're getting that information in the first 15 seconds in which we're actually interrogating the caller. We're also determining, after a motor vehicle accident, if there's hazmat involved, and so we can send a hazmat response. And finally, and I'll get to this in just a second, but what's circled in yellow is there any serious bleeding? Because one of the things I was asked to talk a little bit about is bystander care. And this directly relates to bystander care and what the bystander's interaction is going to be at this accident. When we talk about call triage, in fact, is there evidence behind this? And indeed there is. The University of Sheffield has indicated that prioritization of calls in the control room is safe. There's a low risk of under triage. It's consistently considered to be very low, and that the high acuity systems are the ones that can be discerned so that the response can be sent. When we talk about that response, then we look at in this particular triage system that in fact we're identifying whether the type of vehicle is involved. Is it a bus? Is it a subway? Is it a vehicle hit by a train? And we're also looking at what's going on with that patient. Is the patient an auto pedestrian? Is there an ejection or extrication involved? Or is it a rollover? So an initial interrogation with that caller is providing us with some very, very important information to be able to assign the correct resource. And that correct resource can be, as this chart shows, in a Delta call, or a Delta call is a multiple entry call with a hot response, a high acuity call, so that we're looking at, when we look at resource assignments, we're looking at these different variables. Because these are different variables to consider when we're assigning resources in the United States to a motor vehicle accident. The severity of the patients, the number of the patients, the location. What I mean by location, is it an interstate highway where there's very few access points or not access points? When we talk about access, we're really talking about, is it off the highway? Is it a rollover? Weather is going to be a part of the scene resource assignment. Scene safety. What type of hazard, is there hazardous materials involved? Is there entrapment involved? All this needs to be taken into consideration as we're assigning the resource. So when we have an incident that looks like this, and these are unfortunately quite common in the United States, we're able to determine, in fact, if you look at this particular scene, you're looking at access problems, you're looking at multiple patients, you're looking at high acuity patients, you're looking at low acuity patients, you're looking at potential hazmat, and again, all these need to be considered at the dispatch center by the dispatcher so that we're making the appropriate assignment of resources. Bystander care, I mentioned bystander care earlier. This is significant because currently 91% of the American public expect at the scene of a motor vehicle accident that the bystander is going to intervene with that patient. That bystander is actually going to provide some care. So when we talk about systems of care, we first have the resource responding, but now we have, in fact, the bystander taking care of the patient with instructions. When we're looking, these are very specific instructions regarding what's going on with the patient, regarding hemorrhage, and if there is hemorrhage control required, the specific dispatch instructions continue on how to provide that hemorrhage control. Some of you may know that the most recent emphasis now in the United States is on a stop the bleed program. Unfortunately, this did not originate because of motor vehicle accidents. It's originated because of the number of shootings, the mass shootings we're having in the U.S., and those mass shootings are requiring a stop the bleed program, but this is now transferring to motor vehicle accidents because of the fact that in the U.S. Civil War and in the middle of the 20th century, surgeons have been advocating the use of tourniquets in what we call a dry environment. And that has caused a resurgence in the use of tourniquets not only in the battlefield, but in fact, as we just heard in the last presentation, the need for rapid transport of the patient to the hospital. And as I mentioned, with the increase of urban terrorists, with more hemorrhaging,